Hello and welcome back to the channel. Today we'll be making a cooking game. It was made for a game jam and the theme was raw. I generally don't like to overthink the theme because the beginning is the last place where I want to get bogged down, so I went with the first thing that came to mind, which in this case was a reaction time based game where you make sure your eggs are perfectly cooked. And if they are not, Gordon Ramsay talks trash to you with one of his famous quotes. My first idea was to have Gordon have different facial expressions depending on how you're doing, like the protagonist in the older Doom games. But by the time I finished drawing the first expression, I realized that would take too long. And I don't want to be that game developer that actually polishes his games. Yikes. So instead, I quickly sketched up where stuff would be positioned on the screen so I knew the sizes for the egg and the pan sprites. I was liking how fast I was working so far. Drew the pan, no reference, sheesh. I think that's what a pen handle looks like. I wasn't going to animate it in a sprite, but rather use an animation player in Godot, since we don't really need to change its shape or the angle we're looking at it from. Next up was drawing some egg animations, one for it falling through the air with 4 frames, one for it landing with 14 frames, and one for it actually cooking with, get this, 111 frames. I think that's the most I've ever done for anything. Forgot how an egg looks like for a second there, but then I get into drawing the mother of all animations. This legitimately took me multiple days of giving up and coming back to it. And it's not even that it's a hard thing to animate, it was just really grindy and repetitive. After making like 20 frames, my brain would start melting. So while past me is slowly dying in the background, let's talk about my Discord server that you should join. If you're interested in Godot or game development in general, you should hop in and say hi. I'm just starting it out, but I want to run a bunch of community events like game jams and whatnot from there. Also, if you've got any questions for me personally, it will definitely be the best place to reach me. Links in the description, come hang out. So let's talk about how game mechanics were going to work here. Let's assume that the egg cooking animation has 111 frames, and frame 61 is when the egg is cooked perfectly. That's when the player needs to press space to take the egg off the pan, and we just need to check which frame the egg is on to see if it's undercooked or overcooked. And we can also give the player some leeway by saying that, say, frames 57 to 65 all award points and count as properly cooked. So I set up a basic scene for the game with the pan, Gordon, and egg, and started working on making sure that the egg animation switched when they needed to. It kind of felt nice to have all of the sprites ready to go even before I started coding. Usually for game jams, I'm in panic mode switching between Godot, Sprite, and Audacity. After that, I used Godot's animation player to make an egg tossing animation for the pan. It can animate stuff automatically as long as I tell it where the sprite should be in a given moment in the animation. It's actually super convenient. So I use this animation for when the player is done cooking the egg and needs to toss it off the pan, but I kind of wish I also did some idle animations, kind of like the little flips those pro chefs do. I think it would have really helped with the immersion or whatever, but hindsight is 2020, I guess. So we got the landing, cooking, and tossing mechanics and animations in place. It was time to have Gordon react to how well cooked our eggs are. For this, I relied 100% on the internet to find some juicy Gordon quotes. Got some classic gems in there, but the problem was that the only funny ones were negative. I know it's kind of a stretch, but what if the player did well? So to try and keep the funny going for when the player gets it right, I found some quotes where Gordon says nice things about himself. You cooked that well? I'd like to think I'm a great teacher. That's a good egg. I'm the most unselfish chef in Britain today. Stuff like that. I wasn't sure yet how accurate I wanted the player to be with their hits, but I gave them 10 frames of leeway, which was definitely a lot in hindsight. So if the player did not hit space within this window, they lost some health, which in this case was called Gordon patience. I set up a texture progress node for this, which is basically just a progress bar that takes two sprites and a value to represent a total of the bar. And then I set up a scoring mechanism for when the player got it right. With that, I finished everything that I wanted to happen within like 1 egg's lifespan, so it was time to start spawning more eggs. One thing that I was definitely not sure about was the difficulty curve. It's something that's very hard to gauge for me personally as I make games because I spend a lot of time playing them, and a couple hours in you're just extremely biased. First thing I did to ramp up the difficulty was just speeding up the rate at which the egg cooked, because if you want to make something harder, you gotta make the player do it faster. That's some great game design right there. You guys should be taking notes. Since now the player could actually lose the game, I made an end screen that showed the final score, told them that Gordon was proud of them, and threw them back in the main menu like the embarrassment they are. Later, I also decreased the timing leeway the player had for the perfect egg because I felt like the game was way too easy still. Again, this is totally subjective, but regardless, after this I felt like I did everything I wanted to with the game and I was ready to submit it. So I made a cover image using my favorite method, which is just grabbing the most presentable sprites from the game itself. Created an itch.io page for the game and made sure that it worked there. And finally, submitted the game to the game jam. With that, I could finally rest easy, and you can finally like the video, subscribe to the channel, and join my Discord server. Links in the description. Thank you for watching.